Hey there, friend. Welcome or welcome back. I'm Monica Brooks, a multi-passionate entrepreneur who at times still has no idea what I'm doing with my life, but I choose to show up and keep going each and every day. I'm a former corporate girl who thrives on leadership, improving my life, and I love talking with people. On this podcast, you'll hear stories from people who will inspire you and challenge you to grow in ways that may feel a little uncomfortable. Whether it's by starting your own business, learning how to fail and fail fast, growing within a company, or maybe even showing a little bit of grit in life, you'll hear from an array of people that will leave you inspired and encouraged. Out of all the podcasts that are available, I'm glad you chose to listen to this episode today. Let's get started. Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast. Before we get started, as I was editing this podcast, I think it shows how far I've come in my own growth because I am a recovering perfectionist, and there is this little glitchy sound that kept happening, and I didn't know how to cut it out, so you will hear it, but I'm okay with it. And if I'm okay with it, I think you should be okay with it too. But to get started, today's guest is Jillian Robinson. She is a coach and consultant. Jillian and I met just randomly. We were taking a class together and we stayed connected. And I've learned so much about her. And I know one of her passions is enhancing the human experience. And just those words, human experience, she's going to talk about it in the podcast. That just resonates with me so much. She's going to share more about who she is and also talk to us about heart-centered leadership. So welcome, Jillian, to the podcast.
Hey, Monica. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Now, when I was thinking of topics and different directions I want to take the podcast, we had talked about you being on the podcast because your experience, and we talked about heart-centered leadership. And that was something like when you mentioned that, my ears opened up. Like, I want to know more about this because I feel like leaders sometimes lead with their head
Totally.
versus like lead with their heart. So maybe if you want to just jump in, talk about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the conversation of heart-centered leadership.
Sure. So I'm Jill Robinson. I co-own Soul Aligned Sisters, which is a coaching and consulting business with my sister, Becky Wiley. We've been in business for a couple of years now, and we're sort of like, the thing I love about your intro to your podcast is how you're like, I don't have it all figured out. Like, that's us.
Right.
We don't have it all figured out. But right now we're doing a lot of work around, career coaching. For example, we're working with a lot of people who are in transition in their careers. We also work with businesses, whether it be, doing documentation writing and things like that, or leadership related things. So we kind of are responding to opportunities that come to us from people who are kind of aligned in values with us. So that's sort of what we do. My background is varied. I feel like I've been all the things. It makes it kind of hard to write a bio. I have a bachelor's of arts degree from the University of Dayton in human rights. I went to law school. I was a practicing attorney for a while. I did project management in the legal technology field for quite a while. I also have a side of me that's an activist. I'm a mom. I'm a partner, wife, all the things. So
maybe tell me about, or tell our audience about, what does the soul aligned, like you talked about the sisters part, you co-own this with your sisters. What is the soul aligned piece?
I think for us, it's really about, both for us personally and for the people we work with, reaching into the sort of the truest part of our nature, like the deepest part of ourselves. When we're thinking about the work we want to do, we want to kind of dial into that deepest part of ourselves, like our mission, our purpose, who we really are, and use that as a guide to the type of work that we do and who we work with. But it's also that, like, we find ourselves serving in the role of sister in a lot of ways. So, when we're working with people who are like I said, in like a career transition, for example, and they're kind of in this void space and they don't know, maybe they've been laid off, or they've found themselves in a place where they're like, I don't know what happens next, and they find their way to us. We treat them like our little sister or our little brother, like we really serve in that role as a loving and supportive person in their life who believes in them and believes anything is possible for them. So it's kind of like works both ways.
That's awesome. And I like that aspect of it because you feel the support in a different kind of way.
Hmm.
One of the things you've helped me with in my path and my journey through the exploration of what am I supposed to be doing with my life, you helped me immensely. And just talk briefly on human design. And some people may find this like a little woo-woo. And
Yeah.
if it's not your thing, just maybe fast forward 60 seconds. I don't know. But
Right.
if you're open and curious to what that is, can you just briefly explain human design and how that can help someone in their life?
Yes, a couple of years ago, found this thing called human design. And human design, I think, for your listeners, can kind of be considered a cutting edge personality assessment tool. And the difference really between human design and anything else that's out there, like, 16 personalities or Myers-Briggs or, DISC, those things, is that you don't actually need to answer a series of questions in order to kind of get the results. Through human design, we just use your birth information, and that's what makes it kind of woo-woo. It's kind of like astrology based. But what is super fascinating about it is like how accurate it is. Like it,
Yeah.
when I share people's human design with them, they see themselves in it. And it's not really, for me, it's not really about like, is this true? Which is like kind of, I think, what our like logical mind wants to do. It wants to sort of prove, it wants to see the evidence, it wants to know like this is true, this is a real thing, and it can be measured. But that's not really how I like to approach it. I think of it more as sort of like a treasure map, if you will, where there are these life themes, personality traits and things like that that kind of are shown through your human design that then give you a little bit more of a window into kind of how you operate and what might be the most natural way that you operate, how to best make decisions for yourself, and even to sort of change some of the beliefs that you have of yourself. For example, maybe you think I'm supposed to be like having a ton of energy and working all the time, but really that's not how you're designed. And so that, right? Because you're burned out all the time and you don't have energy, and you're kind of trying to fake it till you make it. But if you can think about yourself in that way and say, oh, well, maybe I'm not actually supposed to be like working this way. Like maybe that's not what's best for me. Then you can start to make some shifts in both your belief system and in like the action you take in the world. I think it's a really super powerful tool, especially for people who are like, what am I even doing here? Like,
Yeah.
where am I going?
Yeah. And I think for you, like when I learned about human design, it confirmed who I knew I was, but it
Hmm.
had a lot of confusion around it. Even I remember thinking I was lazy. Like I'm
Yeah,
just because I need to rest and I just
right,
can't. I don't, but that was part of my design and who I am. And
right.
also seeing people, which is why I'm here today. Like I feel like I have this projection where I see you. You may not see me, and that's okay, but I can see into people and see what they need,
Mhm.
not in a psychic ability kind of way, just a natural talent that I have is like I can say something that really clicks with you because I see you and I see your need right now. So
Mhm.
fascinating. It is fascinating. And we'll talk about how to get in contact with you if people want to learn more about human design, or just as a consultant.
Mhm.
I know you like me, multi-passionate. We have like all these different things our hands are in.
Right.
And regardless, we keep moving forward.
Mhm.
So let's move forward with this and talk about heart-centered leadership. What does that look like? If you just said, oh, I'm looking for someone that's a heart-centered leader, like I have where do you start with something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of preface I want to make into this conversation is that, there are people out in the world who have been studying something like heart-centered leadership for many, many years, who have developed scholarship around it, who have evidence-based approaches, who have research, right, who have done the studies and have all of the stuff kind of compiled for you. Um, I would say that my views on it would align with those, but that's like something specific that I'm not really talking about here, right? And I think that like something like heart-centered leadership falls under a really broad umbrella that would also include things like compassionate leadership, human-centered leadership, servant style leadership, right? So all of these, if you kind of just like without even knowing what they are, right? Like maybe you've never even heard of them before, or maybe you've heard of them, but you don't know anything about them. Like you can kind of get a sense of like what that would be talking about. It's really kind of focused on, if you're looking at a big umbrella, like the human experience and enhancing the human experience and really tending to the human in the interaction, right? Whether that be at work or at home or wherever, right? And whatever facet you are playing a leader, whether it's in your own life and how you think about yourself, or with the people around you.
I love that because if our listeners have heard me speak before, I always talk about how we're in the business of people. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care what you do. You are most likely working with humans who have feelings and emotions. And so I love this topic already. So keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I think like for me, when I think about all the different styles of leadership, and in particular, what we prioritize and what is prevalent in the work, like in the corporate world, that, at the end of the day, at the end of everything, like the human experience is what matters the most. Like that's really what we're here to do, right? And everything is relational. Like we're in relationship, even if we don't recognize it, even if it's not, all of our relationships aren't the same. We're in relationship with each other, and we're in relationship with the world around us and the earth and all of that. So I think like kind of going back to like, what is it? How do you define it? For me, what I think about when I think of heart-centered leadership is really about actually tapping into your heart space, tapping into the place where love and compassion and empathy and joy and happiness and forgiveness reside, right? Like going into the feeling of the heart and using that as a mechanism to sort of create or develop or see a new perspective, to have a new lens through which you can start to act in the world. I think I would say that's sort of like the broad definition.
Like touchy-feely, soft emotionally type thing. This isn't like a hardcore skill. And I think some of these things are really hard. They're difficult. Being a servant leader, being in touch with emotions, these aren't necessarily things they teach you, or that can be taught sometimes. I mean, I guess what is your thought on that? Can these skills of being a servant leader, of having empathy, of really seeing people, is that something that can be taught, or is this a natural thing that people are just born with?
I think the method through which you can find that for yourself can be taught. But it is a practice. This isn't the thing about that I think pulls me a little bit away from some of the scholarship that exists out there on things like heart-centered leadership or compassionate leadership, and kind of moves me in my own direction is, this is really like about you getting in touch with yourself, right? This is about you finding your own heart space. It's about you developing your own ideas about and belief systems around how we exist in the world, and what is the route to eliminate suffering that exists in the people that we're in relationship with, and how do we address some of those things. So I would say, like, yes, it can be taught in a sense, but it's a practice. It's something that we all have. We're all born with it. We have the ability to find these feelings of empathy and compassion and love, and we're likely in and out of that in a variety of relationships and circumstances. And so it's really just about cultivating a practice so that you do have the awareness that actually, like, tapping into those emotions and those feelings in that heart-centered space does and can offer you a new perspective that maybe your like logical thinking mind does not have to offer you.
So this may sound very uncomfortable for some people. We may avoid this. Like, we don't want to go there. We don't want to explore feelings and emotions. I just want to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm thinking, a mindset someone may have, but it takes practice to get to
Mm-hmm.
this point, just like anything else. So if you're not that leader that is connected, maybe emotionally, not saying you have a bestie type relationship with people around
Right.
you, but the connection of seeing people as humans,
Mm-hmm.
that they are made up of energy and stories and sometimes trauma, this may be very uncomfortable if
Mm-hmm.
it's not your thing that comes naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So let me assume someone listening is saying, I'm a heart-centered leader. I know that I'm leading with my heart and not my head. How can you be sure whether you are or you aren't?
I think you will know if you're leading with your heart, if you're tending to the human relationship. Like if that is a priority for you, then you will see. And it isn't to say that there's like some like a set of outcomes or right a set of actions that stems from this. It's really just like a new set of glasses that you can put on, that you or a shift in a perspective, that you can look at a problem that's tough and see like, okay, well, my logical thinking mind says like I can go this direction and maybe this is what's best for the business, or this is what's best for the department or whatever. But from a different perspective, one that's sort of heart-centered, you can see, oh well, there's also a couple other options here. That doesn't mean that you have to choose those options, right? I think this is really about bringing balance more than anything else. As you said, we are like, I think our culture, especially in the United States, in the labor society, in the corporate society, like we are heavily tilted towards logic and reasoning. Like we are heavily tilted towards our thinking mind. And we have probably out of, I would say, self-preservation, kind of cut off everything below the neck, right? Having, these like emotional feelings or like connecting with your heart in the workspace like that maybe feels too vulnerable. That's just, maybe that's not acceptable where you're at. We have to make everything with all of our decisions with our logical thinking mind. And so I'm not suggesting that, something with heart-centered leadership, that it would replace our logical thinking mind. What I want to do is make it a little bit more prevalent. How many interactions can you have where like maybe that leads the way, right? Maybe heart-centered thought or heart-centered action takes precedent over the logical thinking mind. Are you even considering it? So I think, yeah, this is about balancing.
I love that idea because I think in my head I was thinking like, oh, you're one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You're either heart-centered or you're logical. That's not it. We're
No.
bringing these together and like
Mm-hmm.
adding a skill basically to who you already are and the strengths that you have.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there may be all kinds of reasons. And I think like if we get to, if you and I chat about some examples of it, like there are all kinds of reasons why like maybe you can't take the heart-centered action that you come up with. Like maybe it just is not possible for you. And not to say that like it can't be done, but maybe it feels too risky, for example. That's okay. Like that doesn't mean that you're not doing it. You're already doing it. I'm sure of it. People are already doing it in individual situations with individual people throughout their life. And we just want to bring awareness to that and then like try to apply it a little bit more frequently.
Let's say I know that I'm not leading with my heart. What steps could I begin to take to kind of like add that skill and learn that skill and embody that skill to become a better leader?
The first thing that people can really do is to start to bring their awareness into their heart center. Like that's like the first step that you can take, right? So
what does that mean though? What does that look like?
So meaning like, for example, you're getting ready to get on a phone call with, I don't know, maybe it's like a one-on-one with your direct report. Instead of like just kind of rushing from one call to the next and sending emails and responding to IMs while the person is talking, maybe I take 30 seconds before I answer the phone and I just stop everything and I just literally bring my awareness, my thoughts down to the center of my chest. And I try to find in that moment, where does love live? Where does peace live? Where is joy? Where is happiness? And try to sort of find that emotional feeling. And then whether you're successful or not, right? You've done it. successfuls in quotes there. Like you've done it, you've brought your awareness into your heart center, and then you can get on the call and be present with the person who you're meeting with, which actually is like really underrated, right? I mean, how many times are you having conversations with people, especially in a work context, and they're answering emails while you're talking, or they're sending IMs to somebody? So like even just having that presence, I think is like a really good first step. And then I think there has to be some internal work here, right? There has
For
to be
sure.
some thoughts about, what do I believe is true about people? What do I believe is true about the human experience? What do I believe people should experience at work? You know, what do I believe is possible for all of us? And start to kind of develop your own belief system, which can help guide you. So like, for example, one of the things that I believe to be true, that is a really like foundational element of my belief system that sort of guides my work and my understanding of things like heart center leadership, is that I believe people are inherently good. And so that makes it a little bit easier for me to with that as sort of my guiding force, to approach people in a non-judgmental way, to be curious, right, to like seek to understand them, to feel compassion and empathy for where they're at, and then try to alleviate suffering if they're doing something that's like maybe out of the norm, or maybe they're not showing up in the way that they used to. Then I can assume it's not because they're a bad person. I can think like, oh, there's something going on here, and I wonder what it is, and I wonder if I can help with this.
I love that, because I remember reading in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about see, do, and get. So what you see determines what you do, then determines the results that you get. So if you go in and your guiding principle is that there really is good in all people, that's what you're going to see.
Mhm.
Versus, I can't work with anybody. This is too stressful. I don't get along. They not meeting my expectations. Well, then that's what you're going to see. It's like confirmation bias. It's going to confirm what your belief system is.
Mhm.
So if you have the mindset of seeing the good, those one-on-one calls
Mhm.
may go extremely differently.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you can't give feedback. Doesn't mean they don't
Mhm.
have things to work on. But when you become aware of your thoughts and your consciousness, and moving that into your heart, this is what I'm learning from you right now, that can give you amazing outcomes when you start to think that way. I think also mindfulness is a big part of this as well, like being mindful of your thoughts and that voice in your head and what it's doing. I know you've been on a call with me where we're talking about that roommate that lives in your head,
Yes,
and
I
what
love
it's
that.
saying to you throughout the day. That was from a book. That was not my original thought, but it just resonates. Like,
Mhm.
when you become aware of the consciousness that you have, so many things and amazing things can happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think that is something too, that like, if you can start to tap into this feeling, this heart-centered way of thinking or like way of being, then you can apply that to yourself, and to those thoughts that your roommate in your head has, that tells you that you're not good enough, or like you're not prepared, or this is too risky. And you can start to say like, well, why do I believe that to be true? And like, have compassion for yourself instead of judging yourself for it, and try to understand it. And when we understand ourselves, I think you would agree with this, we understand ourselves better and in a deeper way, then we can also understand other people better and in a deeper way.
Absolutely. And I think one of my old director slash friend always talked about fact versus feeling.
Mhm.
So we get emotional and, get caught up in the emotions. But when we're centered on the facts, the emotions can't seep in as easily. We're just dealing with things that are happening. I think the other thing I like about this heart-centered leadership is because it doesn't deal with leadership skills in the sense of like strategy, like how are you going to strategize this, but it is that soft skill. And I say that because I was awful at things like that. Like I'm a very touchy-feely servant leader,
Mhm.
and things like strategy or implementation of projects was not my thing. And that's why I think I didn't love my job completely that I had. I love the people and I love the soft skills. Like, how can I grow my team? How can I make them empowered and independent? Like those types of things. And I think this heart-centered leader, that's probably like when my ears went like, what? Let's talk
You're like,
about
that's
this.
me.
Yes, exactly. Because I wasn't that leader that was good at those types of things. And I think I appreciate the variety of skills of leadership now more than ever. Like I was never going to fit that mold of strategy and how a leader should think. And that's why I feel like the human design aspect helped me know that that's my business. It is people. And it made me feel less of a failure. Even, I mean, sometimes we have that, we talk about imposter syndrome and all that stuff, but I wasn't meant to do that type of work. I'm meant to be exactly where I should be today, talking with people, tapping into them, their knowledge, asking the right questions to draw people out, to keep this conversation going. And I think the soft side of leadership is so important, and to learn more about how we can lead people better.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you talk about that, because the thought that comes to me is like, let's say an organization is kind of operating under, or it has good balance with, because we don't want to throw away the strategic thinking and all of the things that, business leaders tell us is like the way to do business. We're not going to set those aside. We're going to balance them. And in an organization where there's balance there between sort of, that part of it and the heart-centered part of it and the human-centered part of it, like, what if you as a leader who is, you don't think you're a great strategic thinker, like that's maybe not your strong suit or whatever, you have these ideas about what you're capable of, in the business context, like you really could just be like who you are and that would be good enough, right? Like there's plenty of people in leadership who cover those skills very well and know exactly what they're doing. And your skill, what you bring to the table, is important and is necessary and is needed and has a place and a value in the organization. Like leaders don't have to be all things. Right? Like we can lean in on our strengths and allow other people to lean in on their strengths and then like blend it.
That's what's beautiful, is that we're not all meant to be the same.
Correct.
And I think that's where comparison will get you, because you're like, and I used to do that. Like I used to sit in these meetings where it was like 5-year goals and like, and my brain literally couldn't wrap my head around those things. Yes, goals are important, but the strategy behind it, I'm like, but that was the strengths of other people. And I wish I could have told myself back then that you're exactly who you need to be in moments like this, and to challenge yourself in those things, because yes, I have strategy, sure, but it wasn't like when I looked at other leaders around me like, ooh, I don't belong here. But I have my own gifts to lead me through these things. And that's when you bring these leaders together in a room and you're like, wow, the power of people coming together, whether it's strategy, implementation, the nitty-gritty detail. There's people that love that type of stuff, but I think that's great when you can bring people together and have that nice balance from everyone.
Yeah. So I took a training last year in compassionate leadership through the Center for Compassionate Leadership, which I loved and highly recommend. And we have alumni meetings every so often. And, I remember joining one a few months back. And I think what I articulated is that sometimes this path feels lonely. Right? Like in the corporate space, like this isn't necessarily like, like the way to go, right? Like if you are like a forward, heart-centered leader or human-centered leader, servant leader, like you might be one of a few, right? It may not be in your organization something that is valued really. And so it can feel kind of like lonely, like, can I even like make a difference here? Like the comparison comes into play, like what you're talking about. And that's where like having the skills around applying compassion and finding that, love for yourself and non-judgment can really help you continue to walk that path and share it with others, because it does matter, right? Like in every single interaction that you have with somebody that's heart-centered, like that matters to them. And it matters for you.
You just said something interesting. And I think I have to like pause for a second, because if I'm not compassionate with myself, how can I be a compassionate leader to others? So I'm thinking of things like, am I kind to myself?
Mm-hmm.
Do I give myself grace when I mess up and forget to order my son's birthday cake, and now he can't have the special cake that he wanted, which just happened to me, and I beat myself up for a split second, but I'm like, it's okay. I forgive myself for making this mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's so interesting when you ask that question, do I lead myself with compassion?
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. I don't think I've ever asked myself that. And in order to do that, in order to lead others, I truly do have to know what that looks like for me, the conversations I have with myself, how kind I am with myself, how forgiving I am. So, do you agree? I guess that's my question. Do you agree that that's so important to lead yourself with compassion first?
Yes, it's so important. And I would say, like, you don't have to go looking for it. It will find you, like your son's birthday cake, right? Anytime that we are kind of acting in the world or in our relationships, like things will come up, and they're always giving us opportunities to view ourselves and our reactions with compassion. And I would say, like, we're always doing our best. My husband like disagrees with me. He's like, I'm not sure about that. Like, is everybody always doing their best? And, I don't really know either, but like, I'm going to operate as if. So, like, when I make mistakes, like, I can find compassion for myself. And it's so necessary, because we are our own worst critics. Like, I talk to my clients a lot about, how do you feel about making mistakes? Because there's like a lot of judgment around mistakes. And often they will say to me, like, oh, I'm pretty good about forgiving other people, but like, if I make the mistake, then it's a whole other story, right? I feel guilty about it. I ruminate on it. Like, I don't tolerate mistakes for myself. I feel bad, whatever. Like, we're good at punishing ourselves. And it's like, well, how a part of leadership is modeling the behavior.
Totally agree. And I think we forget that sometimes. And one of the courses I teach is talking about how to take care of yourself, like how to lead yourself through change first. Like, as a leader, we want to lead others. We want to be able to help them as much as we can. But if we don't know how to do it, it may not be as effective as we could be by working on ourselves first. I think this has been extremely helpful. And even for me, offering reflection for how I can do better, how can I be compassionate towards myself and continue to show these skills also with other people. Jill, this has been really amazing, a great conversation. But I want to ask you, can you give me an example of what heart-centered leadership might look like and how that can be helpful when you're dealing with different options?
So let's take an example of a organizational shuffling, right? Maybe positions are being moved, or departments are shifting, or positions are being eliminated, maybe something like that, right? So that's happening in the background. Let's say that I'm the manager here, and you, Monica, are my employee, and you report to me. You have maybe caught a sense that something's happening behind the scenes with your position. You don't really know. No one has said anything about it, but you're kind of picking up on it, right? And so maybe over the course of a couple of conversations, you've raised this to me a couple times, like kind of inquiring, like, is something going on? Like, is my position changing? Like, what's the future here? And I've sort of said, don't worry about it. Like, everything's fine, right? I've tried to sort of like, sidestep it a little bit, because the truth is, yes, something is happening. It's just that I'm not at liberty to share with you, who's in the position, that yes, your position is changing, or that yes, you're moving into a different role, right? Because there's this like invisible line of like managers and employees, and non-managers, the line of communication. And so this is something that I'm not really at liberty to share. So when you confront me with it, maybe like my logical thinking mind says, I can't share this with you, Monica. Like, I hear you want to know, but I can't tell you. I'm not at liberty to discuss this. It's being figured out, or it's going to be rolled out soon, and you'll find out when everybody else finds out. And that's sort of the rules of the road, right? But if I step into kind of my heart space, and I look at you through like the lens of, not romantic love, but just love as like a human being, and I honor who you are as like a human, having a human experience just like I am, then maybe like the options look like, well, maybe I should just tell her, Like what I see is that she really is feeling uncomfortable and insecure about her position. And that's what's driving these questions. And maybe like the best thing I could do for her is be honest with her about what's going to happen. Or maybe another option would be, well, I'm not going to tell her, but maybe like she should be involved, right, in the conversation around what's going to happen in the future of her position. Maybe I shouldn't be having those conversations. Maybe we as an organization shouldn't be having those conversations without the people who are directly impacted, right? So now, whether or not I pursue that path, right, those heart-centered options, either telling you and being transparent or trying to get you to, a seat at the table, right, to have these conversations about the future of the position, I don't know, right? Like then I start to think like, okay, well, how risky is it for me to like tell her? Like, am I going to get fired?
But I think what you're saying is the awareness around what's happening with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say none of those options are feasible for whatever reason, but the fact that you stopped and you paused
Mm-hmm.
and looked at this person and the feelings that they were feeling, the emotions, the insecurity, unknowns, what's going to happen. I think that's a big part of it. So like, let's not even get to the decision part. But the fact that you're stopping and you're thinking about it and you're looking at the different options as a heart-centered leader, that opens so many more doors for you and the possibility of what to do next.
Yeah. And there's this element of like alleviating your suffering. Like, how can I help you feel better about where you are right now when the future is uncertain in your position? Like, what action can we take together? What do you need? And part of that is me asking you, what do you need to feel more secure where you're at? Because at the end of the day, things like heart-centered leadership are really about trying to notice suffering in others that you're in relationship with, and then, applying compassion and then doing something about it, right? Trying to help alleviate it.
I love that. That's such a great example that I think probably a lot of people could relate to, because there are so many changes happening within an organization, whether it's a organizational structure or downsizing.
Yes.
People are in fear of AI, but just having that, I think that check in with yourself, check in with your emotions before you respond can really help, and having the awareness around being a heart-centered leader.
Yeah. I mean, I really see like AI, how that's sort of coming up and the new ways it's going to be used. It tells us that we have to dial in even more to the human aspect of living in this world.
Yeah.
If we're going to outsource like some of this work or some of the decision-making process to AI, then it's incumbent upon us to keep the humanness like forefront.
The human touch, the human need that I think it's going to be even more in need as we move into automation. So I think that's a really, really great point.
Yep.
Jill, thank you so much for taking time to talk about this today. How can people get in touch with you or learn more about what you do?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. I post sometimes when I'm feeling like it. That's a great way to, especially in the kind of like career corporate sector, like, follow us on LinkedIn. Well, myself and my sister, Becky Wiley. Our website is soulalignedsisters.com. So that's another way you can reach out to us. But like, if this resonates for you in the way that I'm talking about it, then like, we're connected, right? So come find me, like, let's figure this out together. We, Monica and I, like we said, we don't have all the answers, like we're figuring it out, and we need each other to help us like kind of evolve where we're going.
Yeah. And someone who also, I think it's important, someone who speaks your language as far as like these types of topics, the compassion you talked about, the heart-centered leadership, the need to want to grow and understand your role in life and what you're meant to be what you're meant to do. And I think is also really important as well. So thank you, Jill, for your time today. And I will put your contact information and the details below.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Monica. It was great to talk to you.
Same to you. Bye.
Bye.